That's right. That's right. What was that? Broadcast on YouTube. Yeah. Yeah. No, this is like afterwards. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Me too. What's the top? Why do you wear? Oh. Do you have any recommendations? Or Shabbos? Shabbos is a tough car. Always look. Are you staying for the talk? We're gonna do it right now. Okay. Maybe you want to eat dinner? I want to know. I want to admit to it. Remember the name. Sure. Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome. Want to get started in the last part of this series that was the Am Yisrael Chai Spring Lecture Series, particularly focusing on voices of inspiration and Emunah from campus. And we had two previous talks that were hopefully, meaningful, inspiring, that got us to really grapple with what we're dealing with. Dr. Viton talked about what we're really grappling with in a very practical way, particularly from what's happening on college campuses. We of course heard last time from Professor Shai Davidai, who really spoke about the bravery and the courage of standing up in this difficult moment and not cowering as a way of approaching this difficult period of increased anti-Semitism and so much hatred being shown to the Jewish people, certainly in the state of Israel, but here as well. And tonight we kind of pivot to how we grapple with difficult times. Right? Moshe Tzvi Weinberg was really our guest speaker tonight. He's going to speak about honest questions and imperfect answers. Right, the Pesach Seder. It's all about questions and answers. And he's going to speak about grappling with Emunah at the Pesach Seder. And just a word about Moshe Tzvi Weinberg, who we've had here in the community before, who's a wonderful, an incredibly erudite speaker. But any of the students who we've had a number of Talmidim from our community always say, or Moshe Tzvi Weinberg, what an incredible person, just how much he loves his students, the care and the warmth that he shows, right? It's a unique quality and characteristic to have such amazing wisdom, to be a Talmid Chacham, and to also have the warmth to really bring people in and help them feel connected to that beautiful Torah that he teaches. So Rav Moshe Tzvi Weinberg, just so you have a framework, if you've never heard him speak before, currently serves as the Mashpia for Congregation of Beth Abraham in Bergenfield. And he also teaches at Yeshiva University's Irving I. Stone Beit Midrash program, where he currently serves as the Mashgiach Ruchani. And Rabbi Weinberg is known for his deep warmth, his uplifting shiurim, and through his focus on gleaning spiritual insights from the great Hasidic masters. By the way, side point, great podcast on the rabbinic podcast that you really brought out the warmth of Hasidut and how it really relates to our time. And he's always a source of connection and inspiration for his congregants and students on campus. And we are really honored to have you tonight here at Young Israel Scarsdale to share your Torah, to share your warmth and your wisdom with us tonight. Rav Moshe Tzvi Weinberg, please rise.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi Klinger, for those very gracious words. It's very wonderful to be back. I think my first experience in this room was many, many years ago when I played in a Jewish rock band, and we had a little performance in here for some of the youth of the community. It's been many moons since then, but it's wonderful. It's wonderful to be back in this beloved community, to be with my old chavrusa, Matthew Schneider, taught me everything that I know. Of course, we welcome his parents and really so many points of connection just to be here. And I want to thank Rabbi Morgenstern in his absence, but he's a dear friend of mine and has been for a long time. And it's really wonderful just to be here, to prepare for the Yom Tov of Pesach together. I was thinking on the ride over, just being together. Just being together at a time like this, with everything going on in the world, we cannot take it for granted. I mean, you had speakers who spoke about what's happening on college campuses. I can only reflect on what's happening at Yeshiva University, and it's a good place to be at a time like this. Although we're doing our work as well. There's a lot of work to be done. We've had our fair share of opportunities over the George Washington Bridge in Teaneck and Bergenfield to come out for Klal Yisrael. It's really remarkable times, and we can't take it for granted when Jews just come together, whether it's learning Torah or just spending time together, appreciating another moment of life in a real way, in an honest way. Chazal tell us, or sages tell us, on the last pasuk in Tehillim, Kol haneshama tahalelka haluka, that every soul should sing the praises of Hashem. The Midrash says, Al kol nishima unishima tahalelka. For every breath we take, hallelujah. Another moment of existence. It's not a small thing. So I'd like to begin actually with one of my favorite Pesach insights, which I think just frames a little bit where we are in world history right now, where we are in Jewish history, where we are in the world, what's happening in the world. At the very beginning of the Haggadah Shel Pesach, when we get to the Magid section, so we have a very strange declaration. Halach ma'anya, we speak of the bread of affliction, and we declare, Hashta hacha, now we are here, L'shana haba, next year, ba'arid Yisrael. We long to be in Eretz Yisrael. L'shana haba b'Yushalayim. We look forward to being in the Holy Land. Alavai, it should be this year. We don't have to push it off so far. We should be thinking about it in a real way. There was a great tzaddik, Rabbi Shua Greenwald, the Chuster Rav, Holocaust survivor, 1944, sent to Auschwitz, survived the war. He wrote a volume of responsa, Sheilot V'Tshuvot Chesed Yehoshua. And in the introduction, he has some of his zichronot, his recollections from the war. He says in the early part of the 1940s, as things were starting to really fall apart, he said his community was rounded up. And it was right before Pesach. It was actually the first day of Pesach. And the Nazis, to maintain a false sense of calm, they gathered the Jews to the shul. And they asked the rabbi to get up and give a drasha, to give a sermon. He said, what am I going to say? Zman Cherutenu, time of our freedom, the time of our geula, the time of our redemption. He said he got up, he had no idea what to say. What am I going to tell? The second he rose to the podium, he said everyone burst out crying. Everyone had suffered at that point. It was still in the earlier part of the suffering that lay ahead. He got up and all of a sudden this idea Hashem put this idea in his head. Hashta hacha l'shana haba ba'arid Yisrael. And he asked a very simple question. He said, why do we declare hashta hacha, now we are here, hashata hacha, now we're here next year in Jerusalem, next year in Eretz Yisrael? Why do I have to say now I'm here? I mean, what am I adding by saying now I'm here? Right? Here I am. Let's talk about where we aspire to be. Hashata hacha, now I'm here. And he offered the following suggestion, and it's so deep and it's so rich, and I share it with my family every year on Pesach since I've discovered this insight, and every year it becomes more true. And this year it's incredibly true. Hashata hacha, now we're here. He turned to the community, the people who are suffering, the people, his kehillah, his beloved kehillah, crying before him. And he said, do you realize that it's not a small thing to say, Hashata hacha, now we're still here? He said, all the neighboring communities have already been wiped out. We all know someone who's no longer here. He said, Hashata hacha, the fact that we've survived until this point of the war is no less than a miracle, he said. And he quoted the Talmudic passage that God doesn't make miracles for nothing, which obviously is a loaded statement and requires a lot of analysis. But he said, if we believe that miraculously we've made it to this point, if that's a miracle, so why would it be asking too much of God, to continue this miracle, to see us through to the other side? Hashata hacha means I'm reflecting on the fact that I've survived until now. And when I appreciate how miraculous, how wondrous that truly is, the survival of the Jewish people collectively, every one of us, our own personal story, we follow our own chain back to our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and beyond, and reflect on how many enemies tried to snuff us out along the way. Hashata hacha, the fact that I'm here is a miracle, and therefore, yes, I dare to dream the Shana Haba Ba'arid Yisrael. I believe that we can continue the rest of the way. It's such a tefillah of optimism. It's such an appreciation of the survival of the Jewish people, and I feel that so deeply with each passing year, but all the more so after a year like this, the one that we've Tafshin Pei Dal. It's been a complicated year to say the least, thus far. But to pause at the beginning of this year and just to recognize Hashata hacha, how beautiful it is. Jews coming together on a Tuesday night. It was just Rosh Chodesh Nisan today, preparing to once again celebrate our freedom, our redemption, in times where that notion almost rubs us the wrong way. But to have the courage to be hopeful that if we made it this far, it's not so crazy. It's not so abstract to dream about a geula shlema, as foreign as that notion may be to us. And that's really, I want to speak about tonight, the complexity of Emunah, of faith, of Emunah, of bitachon, of faith, of trust. Sometimes we oversimplify Emunah to being a yes or no answer. Either I have it or I don't. And of course, faith and trust, it's on a spectrum. And there's ups and there's downs, and we try to work through the topic. But there's no night in the calendar year that celebrates the faith of the Jewish people more than the Pesach Seder. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the first words we heard out of God's mouth, as it were in Har Sinai, I am Hashem your God, who took you out of Mitzrayim. That very pasuk is the first mitzvah of the Torah, to believe in a creator. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, not a creator who simply created the world, but a God who's actively involved in our lives. Asher Tzeicha me'eretz Mitzrayim, who took each and every one of us out of Mitzrayim. And we spend the Seder night working on that, trying to internalize that truth. There's a God in the world. He provides for us. He brings redemption to his beloved Jewish people. And he's taking care of his world. It says in Shir Hashirim, Hashem refers to the world as a garden. Basi lagani, I've come to my garden. Sometimes you look out the metaphorical window and it's a jungle out there. It doesn't feel like much of a garden. We have to remind ourselves that's not how God sees it. That's not how Hashem sees it. Hashem says it's a beautiful world. And Hashem turns to us as his partners in creation to maintain the beauty of the world, to maintain that faith. Even in times when it's not so easy and there are a lot of questions. And that's what I really want to speak about tonight. Kind of that crossroads between the world of faith and the world of questions. Because the Seder night forces us to have that encounter. There is no night, there is no holiday, I should say, in the calendar year that calls upon us to question as much as Pesach. Already, the Gemara tells us, Shloshim Yom Kodem Achad, for 30 days before the Yom Tov, Shoalin, we begin to ask questions. I'm sure the rabbis are getting a lot of questions already. It's a lot of practical questions, beyond the theological questions that a Jew has to grapple with as we approach this Yom Tov. But there's countless questions. The Gemara tells us 30 days we spend preparing. The halachic sources discuss, is that true for other Yom Tovim as well? Is that a unique halacha, a unique ruling when it comes to Pesach? I mean, Shavuos, do we need so much? And we got to dust off the cheesecake recipe, we have what to do to get ready on Shavuos. But Pesach, the cleaning, the kashering, the organizing, the planning, the menu planning, it's a lot. And then we frame the whole experience of the Seder in questions and answers. The Gemara tells us that Rabbi Akiva would distribute candies and sweets to the children on Erev Pesach. He would give out dessert before the meal. Dessert's usually at the end of the meal. The Gemara says, why did Rabbi Akiva have that practice? To engage the children. We want the kids to ask. That's the refrain throughout the Pesach Seder. If we do anything funny at the Seder that we're not sure exactly why we do it, we can always return to the default answer to get the children to ask. Rav Soloveitchik, actually, I just read, Rav Soloveitchik had a recollection of spending Pesach with his grandfather, the great Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, Rav Chaim Brisker. He said, I definitely plan to adopt this minhag this year, and you for sure will also. Rav Chaim Brisker used to come out at the Seder. At one point, he would disappear into the kitchen. He would come back wearing a pot from the kitchen on his head. And so they said, as a child, he remembers seeing his grandfather, this great sage, this great leader of Klal Yisrael, walking around with like a pot on his head. And of course, the goal was to get the children to ask, to engage in conversation, to spark those questions that the children should ask. The Gemara, almost page after page in the 10th chapter of Maseches Pesachim, which describes the order, the arrangement of the Seder, it goes piece by piece, step by step, question, another strange activity. We bring out chazeret, we take out some type of vegetable, mitadel bechazeret, we dip with that vegetable. Why are we dipping with the vegetable? Tosfos is busy trying to figure out, at the end of the day, Tosfos says, it's really just lehakera, it's to do something unusual, to spark interest in the children. You turn the page, the next daf in Maseches Pesachim describes how as we begin the meal, we have this whole shtick with the Seder plate, right? We move it off the table, or whatever it says in our Haggadahs, move it off to the side, uncover the matzahs, cover the matzahs. We have this whole routine, right, to get the children to ask, why are you cleaning up? Why are you removing the plates? We didn't start the meal yet. We just made Kiddush a few moments ago. You turn the next page of the Gemara, Daf Kuf Tez Zayin. All of a sudden, Mozgin Lo, the Mishnah says, Mozgin Lo Kos Sheni, we're pouring a second cup of wine. The children ask, or a person asks oneself, if there aren't children at the table. We ask, why am I pouring a second cup of Kiddush? We didn't even make Hamotzi yet. Everything is, it's almost ironic that we call it a Seder because it's so out of order. Some even suggest that it's actually called a Seder for the irony of it. It's actually not very misudar at all. But all of this is to arouse the questions. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh. How different is this night? How unusual is this night? What is happening on this night? We want to raise questions. And that's so interesting because on a night of faith, where we're trying to instill within ourselves and our families and our children and our community the clearest of messages, we start asking all these questions. We don't always have such great answers. It's not just a technique for teaching, which is a good technique. When one's trying to engage, in a classroom to encourage questions and answers. But it's actually very much woven into the halacha itself. It's not like we only talk about the story of Mitzrayim at the Seder. Every time we say Shema, we are recalling the miracle of the Exodus from Mitzrayim. So what makes the Seder night different? How is it different than any other night? It's different answers that are given. Rav Chaim Brisker, I mentioned a moment ago, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, there are three major differences. One of the major differences is that when you say Shema, you just have to reference Yetzias Mitzrayim. On this night, built into the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is that it must be in a question-answer format. That's fascinating. Usually we just reference it in shorthand. Tonight, Kol Hamar V'Lesaper Hareza Meshubach. We want to talk about it more and more and more and more. And the more questions, and the more conversation, and the more reflection, the better. That's what we're trying to achieve on this night. But it's interesting that a night of faith is so filled with questions. A night where we're trying to, again, to clarify our values, our principles, the things that define our worldview, our hashkafat hachayim. We invite so many questions to the table. And again, we don't always have great answers. I'll tell you a jarring experience that I had. It sticks out of my mind. It really sticks out of my mind in a very clear way. It was one of my early years teaching in Yeshiva University. I taught in high school and elementary school before that. And one of the students who was not in my class, not in my shir, stopped me one day in the base medrash. He looked anxious, he looked nervous, he looked like something was really wrong. And I was very worried just by his demeanor, his body language. And he says, Rabbi Weinberg, is it okay if I ask you something? So I said, sure. I felt like it was more than just, like what bracha do I make on this apple or something like that. So I said, why don't we go back to my office, we'll sit down, we'll have a proper conversation. So we went back to my office, and the guy's like shaking. I was like, what is he like running from the police? Like, what crime did this guy commit that he's so shaking? Like, what affair did he do? What's? He sits down. He says, "You sure it's okay if I ask you a question?" I said, I'll call him Yaakov. He said, Yaakov, don't have to be nervous. Like, what? This is a judgment-free zone. Whatever. I'm happy to listen. And he sighs this sigh of relief. And I said, what's going on? He said, you don't understand. He said, I was hoping that you'd be open to talking about something that's bothering me, and it wasn't such a major question. But unfortunately, in his younger years, he had attended a yeshiva where he was taught by one of his rebbeim that a ma'amin, a believer, doesn't ask questions. He was scared to ask a question. He was literally terrified to ask a question. You know how sad that is? You know how foreign that is to Judaism? You know what the proof that that's foreign to Yiddishkeit, to Judaism is? The fact that the night of faith, the Pesach Seder, is all questions. We invite questions. We welcome questions. This poor fellow, he was so anxious, he was so nervous that he was somehow crossing that line. That Mishenichnas Nisan, when we enter into the month of Nisan, we just came out of a double Adar, Mishenichnas Adar Marbin B'Simcha. Mishenichnas Nisan, Marbin Be'emunah, tzaddikim say. We increase our emunah. And yet, we're inviting so many questions. Who was the first Jew who questioned? Who was the first Jew who looked at the world and started at Avram Avinu? Our three big holidays, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, correspond to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, in that order. Avram corresponds to Pesach, Yitzchak corresponds to Shavuot. Yaakov, the Torah says about Yaakov, that Yaakov made Sukkot. He was the first one to make Sukkot, interestingly enough, for his animals. He built a bayis for himself, a nice house for himself. For his animals, he built Sukkot. What does that mean when we go to the Sukkot? It's an interesting cheer for another time. But Avram Avinu is the bastion of faith, and he's the one who had the curiosity to go out to the world and say, well, what's going on here? The world implies that there must be a creator, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Avram had the courage to ask those questions. I was therefore the first one to receive the call of Lech Lecha Me'aretz. So Pesach is a Yom Tov where we invite the questions, we welcome the questions. And we invite those questions as a way of strengthening our imunity. What's the difference, just for a moment, between Sukkot and Pesach, between Sukkot and Pesach? What's the difference between those two holidays? They're both holidays that are centered around instilling Emunah. They're both reminders of Yetziat Mitzrayim. When we left Mitzrayim, we sat in Sukkot, or maybe the Ananei HaKavod, the clouds of glory. So what's the difference between the Sukkot experience and the Pesach experience? Sukkot, we're turning our faith outward. We go out to the street, or to our backyard, or to our driveway, and we build this structure. And invariably, right, the garbage man and the neighbor and the people are going to wonder, what's happening over there? What's this booth that you just built? Right, if you're going on a camping trip, we could probably go like a little further out, than your own driveway. What's going on here? Right? And we explain that when we left Egypt, we lived in the wilderness in these very simple huts, and our God provided for us. And Hashem watched over us. We're teaching faith to the world. Over the days of Sukkot, we bring 70 karbanos, 70 parim, 70 bulls, corresponding to the 70 nations of the world. We're projecting our faith outward. We're introducing the world to the fact that there's a God. There's actually a very funny story of Ovadia Yosef, the great Gon, Ovadia Yosef, the great Sephardi Chacham, who restored Sephardi Jewry to its former glory in the Holy Land. Chacham Ovadia Yosef lived in Egypt in 1948, right around the time of the state. Chacham Ovadia, when he was living in Egypt, he built himself a sukkah. It was a time when obviously things were happening in the Holy Land, and he was accused of being a Zionist spy. That's what they said. They said, you built this hut as a reference point for Israeli planes flying up above. And they said to him, as a young rabbi living in Egypt at the time, trying to head the Jewish community in Egypt, which still existed then, it still exists today. They said to him, Rabbi Yosef, you have 7 days to take down that structure, otherwise you're going to be penalized. He said, okay. By the end of the week, I'll have it down, no problem. You don't have to arrest me. Right? We're projecting, but the sukkah is projecting something to others. We want others to notice our sukkah. What happens on Pesach? Pesach, we turn inward. We gather around the table with friends, with family, with children. The mitzvah is v'higadato levincha. For those, again, who have the opportunity to share the story with our family, with our children, generations coming together, to relive the story, not just to share the story, but to re-experience it together as a family coming out of Egypt. It's a deeply personal thing. It's an internal experience of nurturing faith. We bring it inside, and we work on it, and we remind ourselves, like the Medrash says, that it was in the merit of our faith that we left Egypt. What did we have when we left Egypt? What merits did we have? As we're standing there at the Yam Suf, the angels in Shemayim, Chazal tell us, are debating whether or not the Jews deserve to cross the Yam Suf. What zechuyot do we have, other than the courage of lechtech acharai b'midbar, to follow after God, almost with blind faith? True, we had seen a number of miracles, we had what to be hopeful in and for, but that's all we had. We had our faith, and that's what we share on the night of faith. And that's why throughout the year we're always coming back to Pesach. Pesach is like that hinge upon which the whole year revolves. Everything comes back to Pesach. We're standing Friday night with a cup of wine in our hand, reciting Kiddush to welcome the Shabbos. Zecher li'yetziat tchila lemikrai kodesh. Zecher li'yetziat Mitzrayim. We're putting on our tefillin and reminding ourselves how Hashem took us out with a strong arm from Mitzrayim. That lulav, that esrog, the sukkah, Zecher li'yetziat Mitzrayim. So many mitzvahs, so many checkpoints throughout the 613 mitzvahs, bringing us back time and again to Mitzrayim. Why is that so? Says the Ramban, says Nachmanides, in a famous passage in Parshat Bo, Ve'ein min hatema, don't be bothered by our obsession with Yetziat Mitzrayim. Why are we always coming back to that reference point? Imbo lanu mitzvot rabot alzeh. We have so many mitzvos that again are all in the context of Zecher li'yetziat Mitzrayim. We're obsessed with our experience in Egypt. Why is that so? Says the Ramban, don't be surprised. Ki yesod gadol, because it's a major foundation of our existence. Va'amud chazak b'toratenu v'emunatenu. It's what gives teeth. It's what gives strength to our commitment to Torah and to our Emunah. And therefore, the Seder is a night of practicing faithful speech, words of Emunah. He'emanti ki adaber. I believe because I say it. I train myself to say it. The Zohar Kabbalistically refers to the matzah as mechla d'mei hamnusa, which translates as food of faith. Which means that we tell our story in the presence of the matzah, and then we eat our words, literally. We ingest our words. We internalize it to make it a deeply internal experience. My brother has a beautiful insight. Rabbi Gamliel teaches us in the Haggadah, anyone who does not recite and speak about Pesach, matzah, and maror, lo yatsa yedei chavato, has not fulfilled one's obligation. So my brother has an interesting insight. He says, what's Pesach, matzah, maror? If matzah, in fact, is the food of faith, if matzah, again, Kabbalistically, somehow represents this meichla de mehamnusa, this food that's meant to instill emunah. So my brother suggested, Rabbi Gamliel is warning us, Pesach matzah, if you skip over matzah, Pesach, if you skip over the matzah, then maror, your life will be better. Without faith, how do we survive? What do we have? That's all we had standing at the Yam Suf. We turned to Hashem, we said, Hashem, we believe, we want to believe, we're striving to believe. So again, I want to circle back to our question this evening, which is, how could a night of faith be so filled with questions, and so many questions that we're not even so good at answering? Maybe the questions of the Seder are meant to enhance the faith. Maybe that's how we strengthen our faith. Maybe we clarify. A child will ask something, or will ask something to whoever's assembled at our Seder, and we'll come up with an answer that provides insight, that provides depth. After all, how does Maimonides, how does the Rambam himself define the mitzvah of Emunah? Yediyat Hashem, getting to know God. You're not going to get to know God if you don't study God. So it's a group learning session. We put a question on the table. Hopefully we have good answers. There's a great little video of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. You see this fellow, he's standing with his child, and he's coming to Lubavitcher Rebbe to receive $1, as Lubavitcher Rebbe so often did in his great love of the Jewish people on Sunday afternoons. Lubavitcher Rebbe hands this fellow $1, and he looks at the fellow, and he says, Pesach is right around the corner. He says to this fellow, he says, do you know the 4 questions? So he says, yes, Rebbe, I do. I know the 4 questions. And then with a big Lubavitcher Rebbe, glowing smile with his radiant eyes, Lubavitcher Rebbe says to him, he looks at him and he says, and do you have good answers? Do you have good answers? But the son's standing right there. He says, make sure you have good answers for your child. Right? You have to know the questions, you have to know the answers. So halavai, we should know the answers. We should have the good answers. But I think, if I could suggest, I think what we're really doing at the Seder, it's not really about getting to the answers. Because let's be honest, there's always going to be more questions than answers. I'll say it in a way that stings, but I always say it this way. I have to say it a new way now, after October 7th. It stings, but it's honest. And Hashem should allow us to be honest children who have honest questions. Now, the holy Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, the great Kedushat Levi, one of the great Hasidic masters whose love for the Jewish people caused him to grapple with God. He would fight against Hashem. He would always come to the defense of the Jewish people. He was known as the defender of the Jewish people, Sanegoran Shel Yisrael, the defender of the Jewish people. Rav Levi Yitzchak, when he would get to the Manishtan at the Seder, he would look upward and he would say, Rebbeinu Shalom, you think I only have 4 questions? I have 400 questions. I have 4,000 questions. The way I usually say it, and again, Hashem should forgive me, because I'm not, God forbid, questioning in a way that I don't believe. I'm questioning with belief. Hashem, after the Holocaust, we have 6 million questions for you. After October 7th, how many new questions do we have for you, Rebbeinu Shalom? Every day, Lo Aleinu, it seems like we have another question for you, Rebbeinu Shalom. How does this make sense? Where's the love? Where's the protection? And yet we still continue to believe. We still continue to prepare for Pesach. We still continue to daven. We still continue to learn Torah. We're still expecting a Kadosh Baruch Hu's redemption any day now. We live with that. The Chavetz Chaim said, the feeling of longing for Mashiach's arrival, which we're supposed to feel each and every day of our life, in the month of Nisan, it has to be as if it's 50-50, from one moment to the next. It's as likely that it's going to happen today as it's not. Usually we're living with like the 1% chance. I wouldn't mind the Mashiach came. I hope I can say that honestly. But in the month of Nisan, the Chavetz Chaim said, this is the season of redemption. Without being, I'm not making predictions or anything like that. The Gemara warns us not God forbid, to interpret these things, I mean, people texted me after like the earthquake, like, so what do you say about the earthquake? I was like, I don't know. Hashem's saying something. I don't know. I'm not a Navi. I'm sorry. I hate to burst your bubble. What do you say about the eclipse? It's wondrous. It's a wondrous thing. Exactly what God is saying, I don't know. I have the same question, but the question is good. The question is a good thing. It's healthy to ask a question. We come to the Seder and we say, you know what? Questions are invited to this table. Not like that student was shaking in my office, so afraid. What would happen if I asked the wrong question, God forbid? At the Seder, the strength of our faith allows us to ask the question. I'll tell you a fascinating minhag. That's recorded by the Chok Yaakov, one of the interesting collections of halachot and minhagim on Pesach. The Chok Yaakov records a minhag that I don't have this minhag, but I practice this minhag in my mind, so to speak, every year on Pesach. How many matzos do we have at the Seder? So typically it's 3 matzos. Some have a tradition of 2 matzos. The Chok Yaakov brings an interesting tradition of 4 matzos. The 3 main matzos, call them what you will, right? Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, whatever you want to call them. And then the Chok Yaakov says that some have a minhag to place a 4th matzah, almost like in the on-deck circle, in the batter's like right alongside the 3 matzos, and it's referred to as the suffix matzah, the questionable matzah. What's the suffix matzah? The suffix matzah is when your child or grandchild hops up on your lap at the beginning of the Seder and ends up leaning their elbow on the matzah. Now you're down a matzah. No problem. We're cool. We're good. We got another matzah in the on-deck circle. Swap it right in. Good to go. That's the suffix matzah, the backup matzah. In case of emergencies, the Chok Yaakov says we have a suffix matzah that sits off to the side, just off to the side. But I once heard an explanation, and I think it's so true. What's the suffix matzah, the doubtful matzah, the questionable matzah? The suffix matzah represents, again, the food of faith. Matzah represents our Emunah. But matzah, part of Emunah means being willing to grapple with the questions. Bringing the sveikot, bringing our doubts to the table. Bringing our uncertainty to the table. Being okay with asking a question that we're not sure exactly how to answer. Rav Levi Yisrael said, Man, Hashem, 4 questions I have solved. I can sit here all night with you, Hashem, and ask questions. And Hashem whispers back to us, so ask. So ask, let's grapple together. Let's engage. Maybe someone at the table will have something to share, some insight, an angle that you haven't thought of before. How do we actually answer that question in the Haggadah? Here's our answer. On all other nights of the year, we don't do this dipping thing. Tonight we're dipping. Tonight we're leaning. Tonight, right? Usually we eat bread and pizza, right? And crackers and pasta. Tonight only matzah. What's the answer to that question? So a lot of the Mefarshim say, well, how is that the answer? The Satmar Rebbe said an interesting thing. The late Satmar Rebbe said, you know what the answer is? The answer is Avadim Hayinu l'Parav Mitzrayim. Avadim Hayinu, we were slaves, and unfortunately we're still in Gullus, and we don't have all the answers. That's our answer. Our answer is, before we get to the answers, before we try to answer, let's admit that we may not have all the answers. Let's admit that from the start. And let's get comfortable with that. Maybe that's what the Seder is. Maybe the Seder is an opportunity to ask the questions, to grapple with the answers, and to be okay if we can't solve the mystery of how the creator of the universe runs his world. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov said that some people think asking questions on Hashem is improper, it's disrespectful, it's out of line. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, the great Hasidic master, said it's actually a great praise of God to ask a question on Hashem. You know why? Because what you're saying with every question is, Master of the universe, I don't understand. And Hashem says, that's right, you don't. Right. That's right, you don't. And that's why I'm God, and you're Basar V'dam, you're flesh and blood. You're an imperfect human being. And I hope that one day we'll be able to share the answers together, but you have to trust the process. I have a master plan. And I wouldn't want to believe in a God that I understand, because that would make me God. I want a God who's bigger than me. I don't want Jews to suffer. I don't want people to be broken, God forbid, by the questions that we have. Right? But I also want to have the humility. Matzah is also a food of humility. I want to have the humility as I sit there in the presence of that very authentic, simple, wholesome, what it is, what you see is what you get, matzah. Have the humility to say, I can hang on, even if I don't yet have the answers. A great Baal Musar once came to the Slobodki Yeshiva. And he got up to give a fiery Musar lecture. And he was criticizing the students of the Slobodki Yeshiva. You have to understand, the Slobodki Yeshiva prided itself on Gadlut Ha'adam, the greatness, the grandeur of man. In Slobodka, the Talmidim dressed in the finest European styles. They carried themselves with tremendous distinction. There was an emphasis on midos and character development. And this visiting scholar comes in, he starts lambasting and screaming about this and that and all of their shortcomings. The Alter of Slobodka gets up afterwards and he turns to this darshan, this traveling Maggid, and he says, how dare you speak to my students like that? Don't you understand what the curriculum is here? Don't you understand the values that we're inculcating in the students? In this yeshiva, maybe in other yeshivas, that's the message. In this yeshiva, you're totally out of line. My students don't need to hear such a musar shmooze like that. Rav Yitzchak Hutner, the great Rav Yitzchak Hutner, was a student in Slobodka at the time. Turned to the altar of Slobodka and respectfully but honestly said, Rebbe, I was watching you while this guest was speaking. You were crying the entire time. You were so moved by his words. And then you get up afterwards and you say, it's totally out of line. The altar of Slobodka turned to Rav Hutner, two giants of Jewish thought, Jewish philosophy. Hutner was a brilliant mind. And he said to Rav Hutner, he said, a thing and its opposite are among the ways of God himself. Get comfortable with opposites. Get comfortable with contradictions. I can cry and be moved on the one hand, and I can say this has no place at the same time. We end Yom Kippur, the heights of our connection, that moment where we're trying to hold on to Hashem, as it were, and we scream, Hashem hu ha'elokim. Hashem is God's name of kindness. Elokim is God's name of midat hadin, of judgment, of strict judgment. But what are you, God? And in moments of clarity like Yom Kippur, as we're standing, Lifnei Hashem Titaru, Hashem hu ha'elokim. It's all one and the same. Get comfortable with that paradox. It's not easy. It's something maybe only a Jewish heart could understand in some deep way that we can't even explain. But that's who we are. That's the mystery of our depth, of our faith. And that's what we're practicing. That's what we're instilling at the Seder. We're not looking for perfect answers. We'd be lying if we said to our children, or our grandchildren, or our neighbors and friends, or ourselves, that I have it all worked out. None of us have it all worked out. But that doesn't stop us from being proud Jews. That doesn't stop us from believing in Hashem. It doesn't stop us from eating the matzah and looking over at the Suffolk matzah and saying, buddy, I'm with you. I understand. We've got questions. It's not all resolved. Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Twersky, one of the great Torah personalities of our times, Tzaddik Livracha. How many books did he author? 90 books. He wrote on every topic. Amazing person. Really an amazing person. How many people did he help in his lifetime? He has some very raw moments of grappling with his faith. He's shared some of them very honestly, very openly. You can look it up if you're not familiar with what I'm referring to. But I read that after he had passed away, someone shared that when he was a young man, he came to Rabbi Dr. Twersky, with a particular struggle that he was having with his own Emunah. And he said to Rabbi Twersky, he explained his situation. Rabbi Twersky held him by the hand and he looked at him and he said, let me tell you something. To believe in God is absolutely ridiculous. That's what he said. To believe in God is absolutely ridiculous. And with tears in his eyes, Rabbi Twersky said to him, and to not believe in God is equally absolutely ridiculous. I think that's so honest. I think that's so real. I think that's so true. I think that's so true. We all have moments where we've seen the Yad Hashem. We've seen the Hashgacha Pratis. We've seen the Nisim and Aflos. And we're commemorating them at the Seder. With an eye towards the future. Wondering when are we going to finally get the final answers to all of the final questions. And with that, we come to the last step of the Seder. As we wrap up tonight's shir. The Gemara says in Pesach Brachot that Hakol Holek Acher Hachitum. Everything goes by the conclusion. We're holding on. It's one of the things I think that strengthens our faith. When we realize how many people held on until now. Hashata Hacha. How many held on till now? We're so close to the finish line. I'm going to drop out now. I'm going to give up now. We've worked so hard to get to this point. We're not going to hang on just a little bit longer, even though it hurts. It hurts a lot sometimes. Everything follows the conclusion. Hopefully, these are the final birurim, the final fixings that take place before the Geula Shlema and our return to a more perfected world. We come to the end of the Seder after a night of faith, and all of a sudden, nursery rhymes. Nursery rhymes. Chad Gadya. We're singing these strange songs, this funny little tale. There's a goat, there's a cat, there's a stick. Tzaddikim say that Chad Gadya is a very deep and holy tale. So much so that in the 1700s, the Chida, Rav Chaim Yosef David Azulai, one of the most brilliant Sephardi Chachamim of that period of Jewish history, who also authored well over 100 books on every topic, Halacha, Kabbalah, Chumash, Tanakh, everything. Unbelievable. The Chida describes a person. There was a person who who spoke in a scornful fashion about Chad Gadya. He was mezalzel. He said it's just a silly thing that was added at the end of the Seder. There's no real depth to it. You can skip it if you want. And such a person, he said, was put in chayrim by some of the great rabbis of that community. Put in chayrim, was excommunicated for a period of time to teach a lesson that we don't mess with Chad Gadya. If this is how we wrap up a night of faith, there's a very important lesson contained within. And I want to share with you what I think that lesson might be. It's not my own suggestion, but a very, very powerful idea. We come to the end of the Seder, and we've worked hard, we've grappled with faith. Hopefully we came up with some good answers, like Lubavitch Rebbe said. Hopefully our Emunah has been enhanced. We come to that final step of the Seder, and we tell a story of a goat, a man who owned a goat. All of a sudden comes along a cat and consumes the goat. Cat's totally out of line. This fellow paid good money. Right? We paid good money for this goat. And now this thug of a cat comes roaming around and takes advantage of this poor goat. Nebuch, this poor innocent goat. So you know who comes to the defense of the goat when the cat is out of line? The dog. The dog stands up for what's right. He sees someone being bullied, right? And the dog takes a stand against the cat. So the dog is in the right. The dog is standing up for justice. He wants to restore order. Well, the cat apparently has a friend. His name is Stick. The stick comes and strikes the dog, right, to defend the cat. It's part of the cat's posse. So he can tell us, follow this tale for just a moment. The goat is innocent. The cat is out of line. The dog is defending his friend, the goat. The stick is out of line. The fire comes to the defense. The water is out of place. Right? The ox consumes the water. The ox is doing the right thing. Then the shochet, who slaughters the ox, he's in the wrong. The malach hamavis comes and kills the shochet, he's in the right. And you got one step left. And God comes and kills the malach hamavis. And God is in the wrong. Have a great night, everyone. That's how we end the Seder. That's the final message of faith. We spent the whole night trying to inculcate deep Jewish values and faith. The Seder, the night that celebrates the holiday of Avraham Avinu, the first, again, leader of Jewish faith, the one who discovered God in the world. This is the message we want to send everyone to sleep with. And then we do some whole funny thing like, say Shema, don't say Shema, leave your door like half unlocked if you feel comfortable with that, right? Leil Shimurim, God's got our back. We work out the Chad Gadya and Hashem is in the wrong. How could that possibly be? Chassam Sofer was once approached by his son. He said, Dad, I want to talk. Okay? And they sat down together. And the son of the Chassam Sofer, Moshe Sofer, again, one of the greatest halachic authorities of his time, sat down with his own son. And his son said, Dad, I have some theological questions I'd like to run by you, some philosophical questions I'd like to run by you. He figured, my dad's the Gadol Hador, he'll have the answers. And they sat together, Chassam Sofer listened, and he stroked his beard, and he listened, and he listened. He listened as his son presented his questions, and he just sat there. Like this. I'm not sure what to tell you. So, Dad, you're the Gadol Hador. You're supposed to have the answers. I spoke to some of the lower ranking rabbis, and they didn't have the answers, which is fine. I know it's a good question, but you have to have the answer. I don't know what to tell you, son. And his son walked out of the room feeling dejected. Where do I go now? What happens now? What do I do? Do I wake up tomorrow and still pray? Do I still keep Shabbos and kosher and put on my tefillin the next morning? A couple of days go by. And the Chassam Sofer says to his son, if you have some time, I want to sit down and talk. And they sit down together. And the Chassam Sofer, with, again, uncanny brilliance, he picks apart the argument line by line. Each of his sons' theorems and queries, and he pulls the whole thing apart and he shows him it was never a question at all. Restores his faith. And he turns to his son and he says, my beloved son, I wanted to teach you something. He said, when you came to my office, when we sat down, in my little study in the house the other day, I had the answers. When I was your age, I grappled with the same questions. And I spoke to my rebellion. And I spoke to the people in my time. And I got those answers. Over time, I came to understand those answers. And it's a question that's answerable. He said, but I wanted to teach you that it's possible for a Jew to live with a question. You have to be able to go to sleep at night knowing there's a question and still wake up tomorrow morning and still be able to say a bracha on your coffee to still be able to daven a Shemona Esrei, to still do a good deed, put a penny in the pushka and believe that it actually matters in some cosmic sense, not only to the person who's the recipient of your donation. To believe that what we're doing still matters in the world. And yes, we have a lot of questions, but the show can go on with the questions. And that's how we end the Seder. We go through a Chad Gad Yom that doesn't really add up if you actually pay attention to what's going on. The goat is innocent, the cat is wrong, follow the trail. The Malach HaMavis did the right thing. He defended the goat, he's on the team of the goat, and God sometimes seems to be in the wrong. But hang on, at the end of the night, we're able to go to sleep and we're saying, you know what? That's also called Emunah. Grappling with faith is also called Emunah. So I want to conclude with one final story. An incredible story that goes back again to the time of the Holocaust. There was a fellow whose name was Yudel Ziegelman. He had suffered a lot during the war, had been in several concentration camps. After the war, he was freed. What did freedom look like? Went back to his hometown. What was left? Family was gone. It was him and a friend, him and his buddy. And it was actually very dangerous. Even though they had been released, it was incredibly dangerous. There was nowhere to go. There were still Nazis, roaming the streets. It was incredibly dangerous. He found a farmer, a Gentile farmer, who was a kind person, who took him in and said, he can stay by me until it's a little bit safer. Irony of ironies, it was right before Pesach when he achieved his freedom. Man freedom. What kind of freedom is that after everything he had suffered? He was staying in this barn with this farmer. The farmer was a kind person. He would bring him something to eat, bring them a little bit of food. And he confided in the farmer. He said, the Jewish holidays coming up. Pesach, he said, maybe you can help us in some way. What were they going to do? What are they going to do for Pesach? He said, the farmer, I need to, if you have, get us some flour, we can maybe just make some small makeshift little matzah, something just to taste the freedom a little bit. And the farmer said, I'll see what I can do. He's a kind person. He came up with a little bit of flour. He helped them to make a small little makeshift oven, and they baked a couple of matzahs. Maror, what's the halacha with maror? Romaine lettuce, horseradish, what did they use? The truth is, the halacha says that if you don't have one of the official marors, you can use any bitter. You take a piece of grass out of the ground, really, and eat it as maror. Right? And I'm sure Yudel Ziegelman felt maror is not my problem. Plenty of maror. Kosher wine, that's not so simple. That was not going to happen. And as it's getting closer and closer to Pesach, 2 days before Pesach, he's got his little matzahs. He's grappling with this feeling, I want to taste the freedom, knowing how much pain he's still in. All of a sudden, he turns to his friend and he says, wait a minute. How do you have a Seder without wine? Like, how do you actually have a Seder without wine? Like, what do you do? Kadesh, Orchat, how do you start? What do you do? Right? We know in the Hilchot Shabbat that if you don't have wine, you can make Kiddush on the challah. There's all sorts of... What do you do? How does one run a Seder without wine? And the two of them look at each other. I have no idea. Well, how are we going to figure that out? Right? It was just like another stab in their heart. He said, listen to this. Erev Pesach, he gets a knock on the barn door. The secret code. It's the farmer's son. And he said, I have something that you might be interested in. I said, okay. Farmer's son describes him. He said, I was out in the field today. And all of a sudden, it was a gusty day, a lot of wind. He said, and there were some things blowing through the backyard. And it looked like torn pages. I picked up a page and I looked at it, and I don't know for sure, but I think it's Hebrew writing. Maybe it's of interest to you. And he hands him this crumpled up piece of paper. Yudel Ziegelman and his buddy, they roll it out, they flatten it out, and they see it's a torn page from a Shulchan Aruch. Siman Taf Pei Gimel, chapter 483. Chapter 483, Din Mi She'ein Lo Yachetz. Imagine. Did it answer all the questions of World War II? Not even close. Not even close. But it was awake. There's a Kadosh Baruch Hu saying that, you know what? I know you still have questions and I can't solve them for you just yet, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you for making those matzahs. I'm proud of you for grappling with this question. How can we have a Seder when it's very far from perfect? And Hashem sent, maybe in some way, Hashem sent the sign. Think about that page just for a second. Imagine the Nazis coming into that base medrash or into that Jewish home and taking the books, because they didn't just hate the Jewish people, they hated our God and they hated our Pope. Taking them into the streets, tearing the books apart. Who knows where it's been blowing throughout various parts of Europe. That just that day it blew through the backyard. As these two fellows were sitting in that barn, wondering how we're going to make Pesach. It's unbelievable. So Hashat Hacha, that's where I started. Hashat Hacha, we made it so far. It's incredible that we have. We need to celebrate the fact, despite all of the questions, and with all of those questions, with the Safek Matzah on the table, with less than perfect answers, with a Chad Gadya that sends us to sleep at the end of the night with a question on our lips, but to be able to say, Hashat Hacha, I can live with the question. I've made it this far, I'm going to hold on. And Be'ezrat Hashem, in the spirit of our faith, that same faith that the Medrash Mechilta says, was the only thing we had when we stood by the Yam Suf, on our way out of Mitzrayim the first time. Be'ezrat Hashem, each and every one of us will be zocheh to cross that final stretch of world history, of Jewish history. We'll be able to see nothing but revealed good in the world. With the Gula Shlema, the Amitit, the Behera, the Aminu. Thank you very much.
Amen.
Thank you all for coming. And if you have questions,
You definitely ask.